for pest management in general. You have a number of readings here, so if you look down here, there's a website, the AMNH website reading, there's a chapter from NATSCA, there's an example pest management plan, and we're also going to go back into the practical handbook for running a museum and read just the very short part of the pest management section there. So let's go right there. So in running a museum, a practical handbook, right? You're going to start here where we had left off before, integrated risk management of pests. There's an introduction here. They talk about avoiding poison. Why do you want to avoid poison? And then right here they say, begin the methods immediately. This one word makes this statement very strong. It says, don't wait to start integrated pest management. Do it today. And that tells you that this is a very, very important idea and something to really strive for as a museum. Okay, I'm having you read this section, even though I have other sections on pest management, because I really like the way it is presented. The frame of reference it says to avoid sources and attractants. That's a great way to think about pests in a museum. You want to think about insect habitat and attractants throughout this little section here, and as you read the other chapters, you might want to make a list of things that they say make good habitat, and put an asterisk next to things that are particular attractants. These are things to be looking out for when you're looking through your collection. I like this idea of blocking pathways. They talk about the sanitary perimeter concept, and this is actually the only one of the readings that really talks about that, and I think that's a really good concept. So what is it? What does it do? Is it a first or a last resort? Here they talk about detection. I want you to think about the time frame of an insect life cycle, then they have a section on sticky traps. You'll go more into depth on sticky traps later, but think to yourself, how are the sticky traps used and what are they good for? Obviously, we'll talk about it more. Then they talk about how to respond. Your other readings are going to be much more in depth, but this should give you just a good overview to get your mind set. They support alternatives to poison. Why? What are these alternatives? And then you'll be looking for these alternatives in the other readings. And when you see them in multiple readings, you know that they are pretty important methods that multiple people think are good. I am going to have you read this very next section here as well, this integrated sustainable risk management of light, pollutants, temperature, and humidity. These things are all very, very well connected, right? So they talk about the last 4 agents of deterioration in Table 1, and what is different about these last 4 agents? What is another name for them? And that's actually why I'm having you read just this little section here. They have a section on museum lighting. You've already read some other museum lighting, so I'm not going to ask you to go into that. You've read the temperature and humidity guidelines, so I don't need to worry about that. We're going to skip pollutants. We're skipping pollutants, and then right here, integrating management of all 4 agents. So let me get to that section here. What is an important characteristic of these 4 agents, right? That section you just read, now they're talking about these 4 again. What is also a drawback of this wonderful characteristic of these agents? And then I like this section here where they talk about the tools that you should have in your museum. Okay, so that's just catching up a little bit on that, on the last part of that chapter in the practical handbook. Okay, then I want you to go in, and actually we're going to go from superficial to in-depth. So the next thing you're going to do is look at the American Museum webpage about integrated pest management. And here, this is really very focused on natural history collections. I'm trying to give you just the stuff related to natural history collections as a way of condensing or limiting the amount of information that you're responsible for. So here on this site, they talk about the 2 most common types of pests. I want you to know what those are. And then again, they're going to talk about moving away from regular applications of toxic chemicals and why have we done that, and what do we do instead? You picked this up already probably. And what do we call this, right? Okay. They have 3 objectives for an institutional IPM plan, Integrated Pest Management Plan. Here, I think these are really interesting. I'm going to give you an example of an Integrated Pest Management Plan, and I would suggest looking at these objectives. And then on Moodle, there's a link to an Integrated Pest Management Plan for the Minnesota History Center, and so you can see that they have their goals right here. See if those goals match up. It's always a good way of assessing a plan. Okay. Then they have the 4 components of an integrated pest management plan. I like their 4 components better than anyone else's, right? They have, the first step is preventing access. The second step is monitoring. The third step is identification. The 4th step is elimination. I like this a lot. So you want to know those 4 components. Within here, they talk about how the collection environment has implications for pests, right? So you've already looked at those 4 elements that are interrelated. Pests are related with these agents of deterioration. Okay, they are also going to have a section on solid wood packing materials. This is actually quite important. So read about that. Read about the invasive horn beetle. Okay, and know why that's a problem in collections. Okay, we've already talked about the 2nd and 3rd and 4th elements. When they talk about elimination here, this 4th element, they'll talk about 2 different types of treatments. See if these are the treatments that are talked about in the previous reading, and then pay attention in the next reading to find these same treatments, because those are going to be important ones. They're repeated in multiple readings, so I want you to know about them. Okay, and then they have this fantastic link here to museumpest.net. This website is an incredible resource. You guys are going to spend a lot of time on that, I would bet. Okay. Then they have collection-specific information, and I want you to think about what's unique about each of the types of collections, what's most vulnerable. And these are things to check for in your collections. Okay, these are specific things I want you to be looking for. Keep going down, and I want to point out here in IPM, they start talking about specimen labels, right? When you see things that talk about paper being at risk, well, we have paper in all of our collections, basically. So think about that. Also, we have glue in the boxes that we use, and that can be another attractant or food for pests. Okay, we're on to the last reading now. And this is Care and Conservation of Natural History Collections from Natural Sciences Collections Association. Okay, so you're going to sort of pick up in the middle here. I'd say go ahead and start down here at pest identification. And I'm not going to ask you to know all of the species names here. I want you to know the major types of pests, right? And their sources, what they eat or infest. This would make a great matching question on a test. This table here is fantastic. In fact, I would suggest adding another column for yourself, which will be sources for any of these. Where are these coming from? So you know what to look out for. Okay, other things I specifically want to point out. Right, so these are pictures, so you know what they look like. When they talk about woolly bears, they're not talking about woolly bear caterpillars. They're talking about down here on the bottom left, I and J, that these larvae for dermestids, for carpet beetles, look woolly, and they can be called woolly bears. Moving on, I liked a lot of this section in here, so I highlighted a lot of that. Hide and leather beetles. Here's a section, I'm just giving you an idea of how to read this, right? So they point out sources here for dermestids. It's good to point out different types of things that they infect. Okay, when you go into the section on clothes moths, they talk about dark areas, shunning light, that kind of thing. What does an infestation look like? That's good to know, particularly for clothes moths. How can you tell the difference between the eggs and the frass? I thought that was a helpful thing down here. Where exactly does the damage occur? Okay. What is at risk and what is not at risk? So pay attention to this part here about what is not at risk. They keep moving on. They talk about biscuit beetles, cigarette beetles, book lice. We have a lot of books in the museum. Spider beetles. Okay. In this section here, there are a couple of these that talk about freeze-dried animal specimens. This is a method of preparation that we use here for very small specimens, tiny things like hummingbirds, tiny little mice even, or other rodents. So we're very concerned with things that infest those. They are going to make some mentions of temperatures, and so you want to pay attention to that. I already mentioned we have lots of books, so we're going to keep going. Here's another mention of temperature. They have a mention of humidity being important. Silverfish, we just had a silverfish today in the museum in a specimen box. Okay, they talk over here about cockroaches, and the reason I want to point this out is because they talk about cockroaches being nocturnal and needing to do inspections at different times of day, so you're sure to catch all the different types of pests. I thought that was very helpful. Okay, now in the section on, I'm not going to be too worried about ants. I'm not going to be too worried about overall termites. However, there are a few that we do have some issues with. So drywood termites will infect books, so you want to know how to identify those. Subterranean termites. I thought this was interesting mainly because they talk about needing moisture and that, fungi, that association with fungi. They talk about desiccation being an issue for these species. So this is just good biology to know about your pests so that you know when they're going to be more present than others. They talk about basement areas are particularly at risk, and you'll be thinking about the level of our collections in the building. They start talking about rodents, and that's something that you really have to worry about if you have food in your museum, and that's one reason we try to keep food out as much as possible. Now we get into the nitty-gritty for your survey, right? So you've gotten some good information here. This is the stuff you're going to be using when you do your survey. So this other stuff is a lot for a test, and this now we're getting into your application. Okay, so you want to think about how pests enter the facility, right? This is similar to the previous reading in which they were talking about, pathways, block entryways, that kind of thing. Okay. You may want to draw out, doesn't have to be scale, but draw out just your collection room. It'll become useful in just a second.